Can people hear me now? Can't hear you, Carmen. You're on mute.
I got in. Did you just start?
I just started. 4:30 is when I usually start, so I get here a few minutes early.
I thought it was on my end.
Nope, it's all good. I've been having a
Okay.
day. I got power back about 35 minutes ago.
Great. Because I've been at it for a half hour. I'm
Oh,
like,
good.
can I get in? Can I get in?
No, 4:30 or 4:30 my time.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is in your zone.
Yeah. Great. Because I thought I was going to miss you.
I thought I was going to miss everybody. So we're in good shape to be here. We will give folks a few minutes to get going. And as always, in the meantime, welcome. And if you have questions about what we've done before, now's a good time to ask them. And if you have things you want to show off while we wait for other people, that's okay too, if you don't want to do it at the end.
Okay. I know what it was. I was a half hour early.
That would do it.
That's why I was panicking. I was a half hour early.
I'll do it. It's okay. I feel like I'm like a day and a half late at this point with the day I've had. So we'll meet in the middle.
How was your weekend?
Workshop?
Workshop.
It ended up being a couple of private lessons instead, because we didn't meet the minimum for running the whole show. So when I do that, I have to switch it out to smaller group sessions. So I did one private series this weekend, and we'll do another. I think I'm scheduled for next week, but it was good. People got to do what they wanted to do, and clasps always make me happy. So I'm enjoying that. I'll have another clasps class through Metalworks in July, but it's going to be a different batch of clasps. But that one will be fun if you're looking for lots of little kinds of clasps to use. And next up is hollow forms, which is one of my favorite things to do. So yeah, it's good weekend. How about y'all? Did you have good weekends? Get time in the studio?
I sort of did a little bit. I found some more little gems I had stored away, and I didn't know I had, because I don't do it. So that was like, yay, I have these. I didn't think I had any more.
Nice.
So
gotta save some for the prong setting and stuff.
Yeah,
that's our next chapter. I'm excited to get to prong setting.
I was looking for the bullet type shapes.
Yeah,
and,
they're hard to find. Not a lot of people sell them. Bullets, I know I've seen online at he has a Facebook group, and I'm gonna forget his name off the top of my head. Anybody have, while I'm looking this up, does anybody have other good sources for bullet shapes? Feel free to unmute and hop on, or I'm not talking about Zandy. That's not a name that's familiar to me. Trying to think what the stone group is that I'm part of. He's very prolific, and he cuts a lot of them himself, but also brings stuff in. I'm gonna have to find the group. Stone or lapidary is it gonna be? It's gonna be lapidary.
Is it Addiction to Stone Exchange?
Oh, well, that's a good one too. I don't know if they have any bullets. I just know that one of the places I've purchased bullets is from this fellow that I'm Huesler, John Huesler, Heusler, Huesler's Lapidary and Jewelry. And he definitely has bullet shapes, although not terribly big. So if you're looking for something ginormous, it won't be there.
John's a great cutter.
Yeah, yeah. Tongue is a little harder to find these days. I'm excited to see whoever Zandy is. The conical ones, I think I posted in the Facebook group. I only found one place that's still making conicals. It's kind of a weird shape, although it's used in a lot of body piercing jewelry. So I may just not be looking in the right places. But it's also kind of a pain in the butt to set. So it depends on how meticulously you want to go through all the different examples like I am. So let's see, we're at 5:32. We'll give it another moment or two as we get started. And I realized, I don't have enough, once I go on screen, I don't have a whole lot of awareness of you guys other than when you pipe up. So please remember that it's okay to unmute and speak out, but also feel free to keep chatter going on the chat and, tell me where you're from, even if I learned it at a previous session, I may have forgotten. Or tell me what you're working on in there, to talk to other folks if you've got questions. So it's okay to keep up the chatter and say hi to each other and all that good stuff. And I catch up every once in a while when I take a breather and skim through any questions that may have gotten posted that you didn't want to say out loud in the moment. So welcome to those of you that managed to come despite my many emails today saying, no, don't come. No, it's not going to happen. Wait, it is going to happen. Yeah, I had power outage starting shortly before I sent out the first message and got it back shortly after. And unfortunately, the trucks are still out front. So I'm hoping they're not doing anything that's going to put us at risk. If I go out this time and I'm out for more than 5 minutes, it means the power has gone down again. So I won't be surprised if we have another one of those weird blips where I get locked in Zoom, like I've had every session with you guys, I think so far. But that's not the same. If I'm gone for 5 minutes, it's for real. So welcome back. And anybody brand new joining us today? If so, pipe up or wave your hand or hit the little buttons down the bottom that tell me you're new. If not, or post in chat, either way. If not, we'll just keep moving. I'm going to be a little bit less organized than I wanted to be because of the outage, but I'm going to try and keep a similar pace of getting us through 2 settings this time. So I want to just do a little backtrack. I have not yet remade my triangle bezel in a way that makes me happy. So there's a spot waiting for it. But the other one that we worked on last time was this big pear, which I did as an 18 gauge outer wall and a 24 gauge inner wall. And so I did the finish polish on that one and set it up. And it's a really nice piece of lemon quartz. And 2 things that I want to point out that I did after, while doing my sanding and filing. You'll note that there's a slight downward file on the front edge where I've gotten just ever so slightly cutting down, because usually that's the point on the stone that dips down a little bit. Not sure if that's showing really well. So I filed a slight angle towards the front, and then I took my ball burr, and this is going to be hard to see, so I will try to spotlight it for you guys with marker. I took a ball burr, and right here at where the point hits, I ball burred out a good chunk of it right at this tip. Okay, so not so much that I'm cutting through, but on any sharp point, especially for faceted stones, only slightly less, or it depends on the cut for a cabochon.
Rachel,
Yep.
Are you spotlighted? Because it keeps.
Oh, I'm
going
not. I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding
you.
me. That makes it a lot easier for you guys to see. Spotlight for everyone. How's that? Better? Big size?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So down here in this tip is where I took my ball burr and just dug out both in the lower inside wall and into the main heavy wall of the bezel. After I'd gotten all my sizing and height and filing and everything done that I wanted to and polishing it up, that pretty much the last thing I did was drill out a little ball burr area. You want to do that especially for faceted stones, less so for cabs unless they're a very thin, sharp point or a very fragile stone, because what you're doing is making sure that there's no downward pressure that pushes the most fragile part of our stone, the tip, the point, into the metal as we're setting it. So this is true when you're doing a square stone, when you're doing a marquee, we'll do the same thing just on both ends. But you want to give it a little bit of breathing space under there. So it's making a little air pocket kind of thing that protects that stone. So that's the last stuff that I did. This is otherwise ready to set. I mean, I'd solder it to a project if I were doing it for a project, but it'll be one of the ones that I can set when I go into the setting mode. So that cleanup is really just lots and lots of filing and sanding. Oops, I keep going out of frame. Again, I cornered it a little bit. So one of the things that I like that John teaches in his classes, but doesn't actually do a lot of talking about in the books, although there's a small set of drawings of his, is this model. Once you've gotten to a heavy walled bezel, there's a lot you can do with it to build on it. You can add prongs to it. You can cut away big chunks of it, because really on a stone like this, we only need sort of this level of holding. So you can cut away portions of it and make sort of castellated walls, or you can make a fake look that you've got two separate sections to it. So those are some of the variations. If you have a lot of stones to play around with, you may want to make a few and look at some of his drawings and get inspiration from it.
Rachel, you said that you cornered it. Do you mean you?
That's what I was describing. Let me get my drawing board out. What I was describing about taking down the front edge.
Yeah.
So,
okay, thank you.
Yep. Oh goodness, my board is not wanting to clean today. So our stone dips down a little bit more at the front on a pear shape sometimes. So what I did for my walls was I just took this straight line that I had and I just took it down a smidge like that, so that it followed the line that it drops down at the front. It's not all stones, it's just a lot, especially on the pear shape, will have that need to be smoothed down. On a marquee shape, we need it usually at both ends. So we take it down like a little ship, sort of bow and stern. You take it down and the stone sets up in there. It's all still about making a nice even wall. When you're trimming back, if it takes care of things like the stone is thicker on one side than on the other, if you get yourself an even layer around it, an even height rather, relative to the stone, that's the important thing. If your stone is really heavy on one side, really tall on one side and really short on the other, you can still make it look nice and even by trimming the short side down to the same amount of metal above the stone as you have on the other side proportionally. So that's what we're doing with that cornering thing. Any other questions?
Excuse me.
Sure.
Yes, Rachel, I want to make sure I understand this. So we're taking the ball burr and we're going in the inside of that tip.
Yep.
On the inside. Then in addition to that, we're going to take a file and we're going to just remove some of that tip on the outside. Is that correct?
So it's the other way around. We're gonna size this.
You're out of focus. You're out of focus.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's the other way around. We're gonna size it first. So what I'm really doing, when I say I'm cornering, I'm just making note of the fact that this stone dips downward a little bit at the front. So just like if I had a high point on the side, I've taken my walls down to account for that. So that takedown on the front is not thinning the metal, it's shortening the metal.
Oh, okay.
More
Shortening
here
it.
than here.
Got it.
Then once I've got all of that sized and I know that it fits so that I have the material I want to actually set over the stone, then I go into any of my points, anywhere that I have a tip that might be fragile and breakable. And I drill that, not all the way through, just a little pocket. Because what we're doing with that pocket, let me see if I can get this drawing.
And the size of the ball burr depends on the size of the stone?
Of the tip of the stone, yeah. Because what you need is to make a space into which that will rest. Because it's not like that one point is holding the whole stone in. It's just that we need to not be breaking it. So we've got our point here, curve here, and sitting down in here, if we were to shove the point of the stone all the way into the corner, right? Whether it's a cab or a faceted stone, this is my really bad faceted drawing. This front tip, if it gets pushed down from here and here, as we're going to do when we set the stone, we need to push the metal around it. If we push too much, we're going to push it right into that outer wall, and it's going to chip the top of the stone off of. Most common thing. In fact, one of my triangles I managed to crunch the corner of because I was forcing it to be too snug.
I understand that, Rachel. It's just, I don't understand how you determine the size of the ball burr that would go into that.
So I use as big a ball burr as I can get away with without cutting through the back wall. Because if this is my wall, let me see if I can draw this dimensionally. How do I want to do that? So if this is my wall, right? I want a ball burr that's going to go this much into it, leaving me enough wall to not weaken when I'm pressing it down, but also leaving a big enough hole that my point isn't at risk. So I guess what I'm more concerned about, if I looked at it from the top, and if my stone is going to go right on that ledge, what I really, really want is to not have any material there, right? And so that there's room for it to go into the corner without crunching. But it's really just you're making a pocket space in there. It's going to depend on the angle and the cut of the stone, just how big the hole is, or the divot. Think of it as a divot, not a hole, because we don't want to punch through. And one of the things you have to be careful of, especially if you're doing thin gauge, is that you're not making outward pushes along. I've had it where I've been drilling and not paying enough attention, and I don't go through, but I do push out the smallest, the thinnest spot right where I'm drilling it out. So do this in small, cautious amounts. Little bit at a time is better than drilling the whole thing crazily. Okay, and that's going to be true on our marquee setting too. Other questions? All right.
Actually, I have a question from last week.
Yeah.
I was just reviewing my notes, and I've got here something about if you've got a heavy gauge bezel,
yeah,
you bevel the top of the inner wall to allow solder. Outer wall?
Oh, the inner wall. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I should have let you finish. Go ahead.
You bevel the top of the inner wall to allow solder to flow down between the two walls.
Yep. So John doesn't do this he doesn't describe doing it in the method 2 that we've been working on, but you can. And it's not exclusive to the heavy wall. It can be either one. So if we're looking side on at our outer wall and our inner wall that we're going to be soldering together, when we do them as 2 separate parts, he distinctly tells us to bevel a little corner off of this so that the solder fills, right? But he doesn't particularly talk about it in this method 2 when we're attaching these in advance. So, you know, I've just been doing this, but that still runs the risk of you getting a little bit of a blob. And what I've been finding is if I do get those blobs, I can reach them with a square file and clean them up more easily than I could when they're already built. You know, I can't get in easily to the closed in place. So maybe that's why he doesn't mention it, or maybe he's thinking it goes without saying. But as a worst case, if you wanted to, you could always pre-file a little bevel before you attach the 2 parts of when you're making this kind of strip, right? Okay. So that was the context of that commentary.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any others? Okay, because I'm a little frazzled today from that whole power thing, I am going to start with the marquee and not do the fiddly squares until the second one today, because I want something I feel like I'm not going to be futzing with too much. It's been a futzy day so far. So our 2 projects for today are the marquee and then a square. faceted stone. And somebody specifically asked that I make sure I do a marquee with a facet. I'm going to show you one that I did that was cabochon, and you'll see it's the exact same principles. And this is actually a pretty good example of that cornering, cutting down the corners, because you can see, hopefully, there's my nice white piece of paper that's getting grubby. Hopefully you can see that it tapers in the front and the back. So I did a filing down on each end. And this stone doesn't have a very sharp pointy point. So I would make a call as to whether I truly need to put in a divot. Never hurts to put in that little inner ball burr divot, and it can save your stone, especially on fragile stones, regardless of whether they're faceted or cabbed. So this is just the same as all of our other builds. This is 2 walls, one shorter than the other, and it's just resting on the stone. And this is the basis of a lot of things we're going to do on other projects in the book. So
Rachel, did you do that one as a strip or 2 separate bezels?
you know, that's one that I did ages ago, so I couldn't even begin to tell you. I can tell you that what I'm personally finding as I've been trying to practice John's method number 2 on a variety of different shapes. I can tell you personally, I think I prefer the make your sheet first for marquee and for teardrop, and they're easy for round. Like, I'm indifferent on round or oval, but I really don't like this method for the squares and emerald cuts. Although emerald cuts I haven't played around enough with to be confident. Personally, that's my take on it. I'm finding the more corners you have, the harder it is to do your sizing, but that could all be about my ability to get precise enough for the cuts. I'm finding I'm under or over more than I realize I should be a lot when I'm doing corners. Whereas something with a point gives me a more distinct goal, like a single point, like a marquee, or a double point, like a marquee, or a single point, like a teardrop. With the curves in it, it's a little easier to use the wall because I'm not fighting every corner. I'm choosing one and doing it carefully, I guess. But that's, again, you may find differently. You may find that this is the way to go for everything, or you may find that old school, making 2 parts and putting them together is better. Okay, so smoky quartz. Once again, I made my wall in advance because we don't need to see me do that every single class or session, rather. And so I've got this measured so that I will have enough that it rests on the stone. I'm on the second wall, and I have a little bit of area to trim so that when I'm going to my sanding and filing, I have a little leeway. And I made it tall enough that my stone is not going to stick out underneath. Okay, that's the most important part when using a faceted stone, is that your coulette doesn't bump out and touch stuff underneath it, because that too can chip. Our weakest points are the corners and the bottom where there's a point. So per John's directions, we are putting this down on a piece of paper and tracing it. Oops, am I out of? I'm still in screen. Good. Screen. Tracing it when it's slippery. It's kind of fun. Okay. So I'm just getting the curvature. That must be me that's lopsided, and this stone can't be that lopsided. Let's see. Okay. So
where did
you
find that large of a marquee? My goodness.
I think this was a Gems for Less or Best in Gems, one of those 2. I love marquee cut. It's one of my favorites. Marquee and Trillion are my 2 favorite stone cuts. And then he says, find anything to use to shape it that is close to the curvature or a little smaller. He wants it actually a little smaller. So this may be, see if I can get that in camera. This may be okay, or I may want to go down one size because it's a fairly close fit on that curve. And the whole reason for going down a little bit smaller is that our metal is going to spring back on us. So let me see if I have one size down. That's way smaller. I need something in between. course, that is the only one even close to that. I don't think we have a better one. Those are a bit bigger. That has a little more curvature to it. We'll go with that one. And so I'm going to bend the bezel around this mandrel to be. Actually, what I realized I want to do before that is I want to square this end up that I'm going to start with, just to get a nice clean start to it. I'm on the fence about whether it's better to cut an angle, to file an angle in the corner that you're going to have the shortest side on, or whether the squaring up makes it easier to cut when we get to the pinch close part. So in this case, I'm going to do it square to see how I like it. Just using this John says these are the most stolen tools in studio classrooms. This miter jig.
It's expensive. That's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah, and the thing, it's one of those ones that there's super cheap knockoff ones, and then there's mid-range, and there's higher price point ones. And the rule of always buy the best you can afford is a good one. But in a case like this, I would actually go with the middle tier price, because it's one of those ones that could walk away and there's not a heck of a lot of difference. It sort of rocked my world when I learned that you could actually file straight up to these without really, doing damage.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm starting with a fairly good squared off edge, roughly. Oh, that's terribly squared off. Let me try that again. Ugh, yeah, that was not squared off. Maybe I lied and we should get the highest quality one, because clearly my middle quality one means I'm not filing as cleanly as I should be.
Well, I think it's easy to have it move away from that tooth.
Yeah. It's feeling a little better. Okay, so I am taking my slightly smaller than the curve I want piece and giving myself a little bit of a curve to it. I am going to use, I'll use a mallet for this one. I'm going to use a mallet to just get it over that curve a little bit more and see how it follows my curve. I need a little bit more material. So I'm in pretty good shape here. I need to then bend it out a little bit more if it's giving me grief. And so what I realize is that a lot of John's drawings in this section reference method 1 in the visual, meaning that he's on the marquee drawings, it looks like he's using his own method 1 and not this two-parter. So we have to give thought to whether we're working inside our line or on our line. And in this case, we need to be working, because we're doing the two-parter, we need to work on the line so that we are actually making the stone fit just inside this resting area. If we were using method 1, we'd be building the outer walls and then separately building the inner walls. So what I want you to remember is we're working upside down. So don't forget that we're using two different wall components, meaning the stone, if you do it upside down like this, you're going to have too big of a setting because you haven't accounted for the tuck under that happens when the stone rests on it. So work with your two-part wall in the same direction that it would be proportional relative to the stone when we're setting it. Did that make any sense at all? Did I confuse things more? Don't work upside down. Pardon?
Yeah, it was confusing. Can you show us
Okay.
the upside down upside?
Yeah, so if I'm working with my stone upside down, my bezel also has to be upside down in order to fit adequately. Because if I forget and I work right side up, let's see if I can show this. Everything is slightly too big by one layer of my wall, right? But if I'm working upside down and making it a snug fit, because the stone is upside down, then the stone is actually acting like it's resting. If I flip this whole thing over, it's resting on the wall that it should be resting on. So I'm sizing according to the way the stone will sit on the piece.
Okay, so the upside down is where there is a clearance where the bezel is gonna go.
It's the
On the
clearance
top.
of the bezel. Yeah, so
Yeah.
because I'm working, the real rule of thumb is when I'm working with my stone upside down, my bezel also has to be upside down.
Okay,
When we're making it in two separate parts, there isn't really an upside down yet, right?
Okay.
Because the outer
Right.
wall could go up or it could go down. And so it's just make sure you don't miss that part, or else if your bezels are constantly big when you're using a two-parter, you're probably forgetting to tuck the stone in as if it were sitting on its inner wall. That's what I'm getting at.
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to go to the very end, just past the end of my stone, and make sure it's positioned. And I got to make sure my curve follows the stone properly. This doesn't quite. Half round pliers to finagle my ending curve a little bit more. And I'm going to mark the spot where my far end meets the stone, meets the wall. Okay, so I'm making that mark. I'm going to square it up. Square up my mark, which is going to be easier to do from the side I haven't yet bent. And I'm going to keep curving to get the other half of my curve. Make sure that I didn't distort. I did a little bit. I distorted my far curve. Oops, I'm doing what I said not to do. I'm working right side up. Okay, so still good on that cornering. I use the saw to do the same kind of cornering we were doing on the last session's projects. I'm doing a saw in, and then I'm going to use my triangle file. Slow and steady on this one. If you go too fast, you'll hop off the track. And remember to score from both sides, and then use your files from both sides as well. I've got my score mark down. One thing for looking ahead to the marquee is we don't use anything but the saw for the marquee equivalent of this, because we're doing such tiny little angles on them. So it's only the sharpness of the angle we're going for that means we need to go to these files on the marquee and on the square and so on. Feeling incredibly awkward and clumsy with my fingers today. Again, switching back and forth so I get an even depth for all of it. super awkward to hold this one, and I need you guys to see it. I'm aiming for about 2/3 of the way through because I need a fairly crisp point to match the shape of the stone. But I'm going to get that several passes. So when we go beyond that 90-degree bend, our points take a couple rounds of filing and sawing to get it crisp. Really, really easy to miss the narrower end of this being 3/4 of the way through or 2/3 of the way through. So just keep an eye on it because working at two different gauges, the double wall versus the single wall, can make this challenging. And then I'm going to finish up with my square to just open that up a little bit more. And I'm once again going to reach for the handy dandy parallel jaw pliers. Even though we're not working on a fully flat edge, it is what's going to hold the material solidly just to the side of the groove that I've made. And again, we push with our fingers. We're not torquing with the pliers themselves. So just that much, and you can see I'm already getting a shape in here, but also it shows that the side that I did first has a good curvature for the stone, and the other side is a little too curved. So we're getting close, but it's still way bigger than we need it. And I can't get my angle to go much steeper than that because I'm at the sort of the max that I've cut. So here's where we switch back to doing a sawing into the seam we've just made. See if I can show that. So I'm going to work my way into the seam with the saw. I would not normally be sawing upside down and in air if it weren't to show you guys. Just using the saw as a file. A saw blade can be a file, it can be a drill bit, and of course it can do its normal job of sawing. But you can actually, one of the parlor tricks that John likes to show is if he gets a broken blade, which happens once in a blue moon for him, he'll snap off the end, the part that doesn't have a lot of teeth, and sharpen the flat end of the blade and put it in a fordum, in a flex shaft, and drill holes with it. And the reason he does that is because the size of those holes is exactly the smallest size you need in order to put a saw blade through to do piercing. So you're not making a bigger hole and making it hard to clean up your piercing. Okay, so we're getting very close. That curve probably needs to be a little curvy, a little flatter. Once again, this is the kind of thing that feels like there's probably really wonderful mathematical ways to figure this out without just sizing to the piece itself. But since every stone, no matter how well calibrated, has its own little foibles, you're still going to end up adjusting. I need to make this a steeper cut. So I can't push it any further than I've got right now. So back to the saw to open my line up again. Again, just using it as a small little file to clear some of the metal out. Still want to go from both sides. See what that gets us for a little bit closer pinch. At this point, I'm going to use some flat pliers to see how much I can angle that in, because I think some of it is that I'm just getting to the springiness of the metal on the full size. Okay. So starting to get my way there. I'm trying to see how to hold this that you guys can see. But I think I overestimated how much I needed at the top of the first side, which means I can't really close it enough. So I'm going to take some material off of that first side. Let's give me a little more leeway. So I can saw it, or I can use, if I'm careful, I can use my shears to get a fairly straight cut. I've lost the having filed it clean by cutting away beyond where I was. So I'm going to have to give myself enough to clean it up. That's what barrette files are for.
So are you filing straight or at an angle?
I am filing straight right now because my theory is that the way that John lays it out in the pictures, he's counting on the gap that gets created between the two pieces. So if we've got one piece coming up this way, and this is where our fold is going to be, he's counting on the being able to put it past that point to get us to where we can file them together or saw them together. Because if I at first was thinking we want to do it flat, but what I realized is that doesn't give you anything good to grip on this side. It leaves our saw mostly just hitting that one. And the whole point of doing them as a closed set is that we're cutting through both of them to get a consistent angle. So I'm trying to sort of square it on this time, because I've been back and forth on this, whether I file it first or not. Like the square ones, we have to do those end corners pre-filed. Otherwise, we're never going to get them squared up. This one, I think the opposite is true, and we want it fairly square onto the point that it's going to be folding. If that makes any sense at all?
Yes, thank you.
Pardon?
I said, yes, thank you.
Sure. And this is all theory and play on my part, because again, my go-to on all of these is to do the two-parter, not to do this method two. I've been making my bezels in two parts as long as I've been doing bezeling.
Question.
Yeah.
Why would the thin parts meet if it was square?
So it's that they won't meet. So what I'm trying to create with this is the point at which, let me see if I can emphasize this corner. So because I'm doing this square on, this one, what am I trying to say? No, maybe I'm backwards on that. So the flat version, doing it square, coming up like this. No, it will cross it. So I don't know. I may just be grabbing at straws trying to find ways to get a cleaner cut in that. Because what I find most awkward about these is that final saw through, because I feel like I've got nothing to grip onto. So I could be wrong. I could be wrong that squaring on isn't going to do much different. The challenge is in these two-parters, and I talked about this the last time. In the two-parters, it's not a challenge to just go together and flat because we're working with a single wall. But when we have an inner and an outer wall on here, The problem is that this stretch of inner wall stops this from getting all the way across. So we end up with, if we were looking at it from end on, let's see if I can draw this one, we'd have one piece sticking out in the way of getting a flush set to the other. So our piece that's coming across here, let's just say we're looking at it sliced open, gets held back by the green. So we have a gap, even when we get these close together and these are budding, what we end up with is a gap up here. So we have to saw and file our way through that to get the angles eventually. And that's the challenge for me with these two-parter, with the method 2, is what's the best way to get a clean cut while still being well sized. Different shapes. Okay, so we now have a good length for the outside, this outer wall. And it's a matter of getting the bend that I need and then doing this saw through at this side. So what I've got is, mark my point here. What I've got is the point that it's going to come across. So I'm marking that point that I want to cut through. And let me bring this over to the detail camera and see if that helps you guys see what I'm talking about with that gap. Bear with me and I'll zoom us in. Let's see this. Zooming in. On the end. Okay, sorry guys, getting this close is a little tricky. Okay, how's that? Can you see that detail here? What I'm showing,
Yes.
so you
Yes,
can?
we can see it.
Okay, so what I'm showing is, see how I can run my pick through the gap? That's because this lower wall is in the way, this lower wall rather, is in the way of this wall, this flap here, getting flush against this one. Because we're making it in two parts, I mean, in one part. If we're making this in two parts, we would do one, close it, we'd do the inside one, close it, and nest them inside of each other. But this second wall is invasive to us getting flush up, and it leaves the top gap on just on the upper rim of the outer wall where it won't reach fitting in. So that's what we're fighting in this technique. And now we have to get a clean flush cut. And so, yes, in theory, filing this at an angle might give us a little bit of a head start on that.
Oh, you're out of camera.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Yes, filing this wall, this outer one, to an angle would get us a head start on that, but we still have to get this inner wall down, cut down to the angle that matches it, because they're being built together. And it's the thing that I find most frustrating about this technique. Questions before I move away again? Okay, I'm gonna back this out a little bit and move us back to the other camera.
Why not make 2 cuts? Why not make a zig and a zag?
A zig and a zag. I don't know which directions would I be making the cuts. I'm not sure.
You would
Zig.
make the double wall shorter and the single wall longer.
Double.
And then
wall-
it would
so
reach
they're all
across.
double walls. So it's all double wall. So you're talking about cutting into like a step.
Yeah,
So if we've got
it would be
this,
hard to make it accurate, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, so you're saying like, I see what you're saying when you mean zigzag. So you're talking about putting one into the other, which is another way that you could connect them. Yeah, absolutely. On certain shapes that may create, you're still going to end up on certain shapes having to shave off an angle on the zag in order to get them to fit. Like in squares, that technique would work pretty straightforwardly. Because we've got a nice perfect, like we just block it and clear out the excess. And then the other one comes in here. Right? But as soon as you start hitting angles, you're adding the need to shape this bottom zag into something that's not perfectly squared on. And technically, especially if you're doing thick walled, you'd need to get a similar angle on the upper wall. So it's worth trying. I think personally that on tiny stones, that would be a little challenging. On something bigger like what I'm working on now, maybe I could get that careful a cut. I don't know. Okay, let me double check.
I think you have to change cameras.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I do. All right, so I've got a fairly snug fit there. I may have to size this up if I get too snug. I always remember that it's easier to size up than down once I've soldered. And so I'm connecting in, see if I can get this to a spot that you guys can actually see me cutting without me cutting myself. So I'm pinching it closed, and I'm going to just use the saw as a file again in essence at first. And it'll start to angle that outer wall and then start to bite into the wall, the longer wall. I've been eating into this at all. Oh, I'm getting there. Is that even remotely visible to you guys? I'm sort of blocking.
Rachel,
Yeah.
could you like just solder it together and then cut through? Would that keep it together?
So
you
like
wouldn't have to
tack
hold
soldering?
it? Yeah.
I mean, I think you probably, the answer is, of course, you could tack solder it, but you're still running into that point out. It's going to be uneven because you're going to run into that point where the wall changes height. So you're going to only be able to tack it at the bottom, where it's double thickness.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll mean that you're fighting through solder to saw again. And then you might have to tack it to get the top, and like, I don't know. I mean, it's worth playing with. Like, there's experiment, find some way that works really well for you.
Can we see that in the up close before you do anything to it, so we can see what it looks like when you do that?
Sure, it's super sloppy right now.
Well, that's okay. I just want to see what we're going to be working with.
Yeah. Let's see. Am I still in focus? There we go. So what I've done on that first pass is I've managed to get the, I'm out of focus again. Hang on. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. I've managed to get the outer wall. This is the one that was the outer wall sliced in the angle. It's going to be ultimately soon. I need to clean it up a lot. And at the same time took a smidge off of the starting wall, just at the outside edge of that double layer.
You're out of camera again.
Oh, phooey. Hang on. I'm trying to figure out. It's reversed of what I'm used to. There we go. Is that back in?
Yep.
Let me actually move my up a little bit. That'll give me more leeway.
Okay, so the shorter wall, not the one you cut. Yeah.
Yep.
Will you file the two edges to become blunt together at an angle?
Yeah, so somebody who's got more mastery of this type of cutting than I would probably do it in a couple of saw blade cuts. Like they do a couple passes and use the blade to do the action. I can tell you that I don't have that level of mastery, so I will be touching up with a file for sure. But the first, you said something that isn't quite the case. You said, I didn't cut this side, but the truth is I did cut this side a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I did cut the lower side a little bit. It just didn't have as much of a bite out of it because it was already close to the angle, but not perfectly at the angle. So what happens, if you've learned the technique for when you're making a ring, that especially a heavy gauge ring, in order to get a good clean fit, after you've got it pushed together, you saw between your two halves. We're doing that same exact thing here. It's just at a funny angle. I keep moving out of screen. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's just at a funny angle. So this is the same principle as that heavy band ring cut down the middle, because even if you don't get a straight line between it, the left and the right sides of your line will match because you've sawed with a single blade down the middle of them. So this I could actually get soldered together. It'd just be really sloppy right now because I didn't
I
get
think this is going to be one of those I'm going to be making 2 or 3 out of copper before I take it to the silver.
Yeah. Or if you want something that's going to feel comparable in effort, I would go with brass, because copper is a lot softer. I hate working with brass, and I hate to have to say that, but it's going to behave more in terms of the fight that you're going to get from silver. The brass in this context of a 2-layer thing will behave more like the silver.
You know, it's strange. But Rachel, when I took classes to learn to be a silversmith, we did, like you were talking about, the double bezel, the inner and outer bezel. We never even soldered them together. The inner sat down inside the outer bezel, and of course, when you soldered it down, it went down too. It got soldered.
That's assuming you have a back plate, right? You're assuming you have a back plate, and many of these designs are not assuming there will be a back plate. So this is a complete project. I mean, other than attaching it to a piece of jewelry.
Oh, okay. Got it. Now I see what you're saying. Yeah, I found that so interesting.
Yeah.
Different ways.
It is, absolutely. And one of the reasons we solder them together in these exercises is because we have an assumption that somebody's going to look at that back and see it, in which case it's got to look nice. Like it's got to look like there wasn't 2 layers. Barbara Miner is asking, how about bronze? I have only done cast bronze. Barbara, if you have experience creating bezels in bronze, I'd be interested to hear it. It takes a lot more heat, doesn't it? You can go off mute if you want. I've literally never worked on a bezel or anything in bronze. I know that my least favorite to work with is nickel, because it feels funny and smells funny to me. My second least favorite is brass, because it is grumpy and oxidizes like crazy. Then copper. I do as much as I can in silver. I want to point out something I'm doing now out of habit. Instead, I should have made mention of it. I'm cutting through a second time, but from the back side. So I'm cutting from the outside and from the back, because it has the thicker material and the material that I need to go through the most to clean this up. It also gives me a little bit better chance to get the angle that I'm looking to make neater, if that makes sense. And I'm seeing I'm getting a little bit of distortion, so I'm just going to straighten up my walls a little bit. I'll make sure that my stone is still even close to fitting. It's looking fairly good. I'll probably have to stretch this a little bit. Okay, so let me show you again what that last cut that I did to change our angles here, our cut here. So we're now a lot neater, getting much closer to having a clean fit. And again, what I did was flip it over and saw from the heavy side down to get the most grip on the part that was needing the cleanup. So now I personally would probably go to a file. It's possible to do the next step with us, like to keep going with a saw blade, but I worry that I'm going to take too much material away. And I think I have a little bit more control when I'm filing. And I love me a barrette file for this very purpose, because there's no filing surface on that outside. And so now I'm just filing a little bit of cleanup to flush up those 2 sides. And I want to make sure again that I haven't distorted my wall too badly. I'm going to actually switch to a smaller barrette file just because I'm finding that it's getting a little too crowded in between the two pieces. So I might have more control. The rule of thumb on files is use the biggest file you can control for the scenario you're in, because that'll take less time to do the filing. But it's not always possible to use a gigantic file in every scenario. It's just, you know, if you're using a tiny file to take large material away, it's going to take you a while. I'm going to do one more saw pass just as a light touch up of this connection, because I'm feeling like the bottom half is nice and clean. The top half is a little rougher. Side, one little notch that wants to hang out up there. And so to the person that asked about can't you solder this, at this point I might actually consider soldering it, and if I don't like the point I got, then cutting down, because I know that I'm cutting down the middle of the connection. But for now I'm actually feeling like that this is probably where I can solder it. If I can hold it together. So I need to either do a binding wire to this or come up with some kind of rig that would hold it tightly together, or anneal it enough that I can connect it. So the one thing that that's interesting to me about the soldering that John does on this one is he waits until we've got both of these parts ready to solder. I don't know why he does it that way on this one when he doesn't do it on the triangle that way. But I'm going to actually try soldering the corner that is not open to get it solid again. And then that'll anneal the piece as well. I'm going to reshape it and see if I can get a closer, snugger fit without having to binding wire this. Otherwise, I'll show you guys how I go about doing binding wire twists. Okay, so again, I'm just going to be soldering the back end, the fold end. And I'm working upside down again, because I want to get it to the hottest part to be the heaviest material. If I do it from the top side down, I'm going to risk melting my upper lip of the bezel fast by heating it more than I do the bottom before the flow happens. And I'm going to be using hard solder for this. If I can figure out where I put my hard solder. There it is. Am I zoomed out enough? I'm not zoomed out enough. A little closer to you guys. So I'm aiming for this end to get filled in with a little bit of solder. I'm a huge fan of pick soldering. It speeds a lot of things up, but if you don't have the dexterity yet for pick soldering, you can always just put a tweezer, a piece of chip solder on, or whatever works for you. And I'm aiming to get this to flow down the inside of my file line. Go just like that, all the way. Let's see if we got it up to the top where I want it. I always check on these double wall ones to make sure that I actually got it to flow fully down the front as well, the top as well, because it often stops at the inside wall. And we're going to be ball burring out a lot of what material comes down in this. So I'm not too worried if I flood a little bit. Okay, in the course of that should also have annealed a little bit for me. So I can head back to the bench if I need to and squish it back together so I get a snugger fit. Yeah, I won't need to use the bezel wire, the binding wire for that. If you don't use binding wire and you're curious about it, it's a pretty wonderful thing if used right and a pretty awful thing if not. There's a video tutorial on my YouTube site about how to make a proper binding wire twist. Okay, so all I'm doing at this point is now making sure that I have a good fit on the seam line. And I may do one more pass for good measure. Saw. That makes me happy. Up the angles. This piece for some reason really wants to torque.
Rachel, can you switch cameras,
Oh,
please?
sorry. Yep, I'm sitting here doing things at my bench block. So all I'm doing is just sort of touching up the fit to try to make sure that my seam line is going to stay closed. The annealing that took place during that did the trick, but I wanted to get a little smidge of a nub of material off. So I did another pass with the saw, just again, cutting down my open line, just squeezing them together. So now we hop back and we do the other seam. Again, we're going to use hard solder, and we're going to be relatively generous about it. I'm on the right camera. Yes, I'm on the right camera. And I do my hard solder. So whenever you have a seam in silver, if you heat the back side opposite the seam first, the heat will help close the seam up a little snugger. If you've ever had a jump ring open up on you as you go to solder it, it's often because the heat hit the front seam before it hit the back seam, or hit the back of the line. Oh, that rolled off on me. Let's see. Trying to get this at an angle that you guys can see. And I also never object to having pliers handy, tweezers handy to help hold it, but I don't want to put too much of the steel on there while I'm getting it to flow, because it may cause it to overheat in that spot. And I may have done just that. There we go. Getting super hot. Oh, goodness, I'm hitting all the wrong places today. A lot of cleanup on this one. Oh, it's gotten it from the outside. Didn't get it on the inside. Is the problem. One little spot at the top. This may call for that sawing it apart and resoldering it, simply because it opened up on me a little bit at the top. I don't know if that's visible. Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I do have it filled. Oh, I was seeing a dark spot that I thought was it opening back up. So I may be okay on that. I'm going to toss this in the pickle for a few minutes, and we'll see whether it actually looks good enough to use after filing and sanding and all that good stuff. Any questions on that one?
I will say that, Rachel, the videos on the YouTube are fantastic to go back, even if you have to go back 2 or 3 times.
Sure.
Because, I'm struggling with this one bezel, okay?
Yeah.
I've already made this booger like 3 times now, okay? I ordered in the new pliers that you're using, so this is my last hope before I have to make bezel number 4.
What shape?
Why
Are you doing a marquee? You're doing a marquee?
No, I'm doing a stupid oval.
Oh, okay. And you're doing
simple.
they get easier, I promise. Are you doing method 1 or method 2?
I mean, and it's like a hair too small. I mean, I swear it's like a hair too small. I've taken it to the round mandrel.
Okay.
I've just tried to size it up.
Yep.
And I love the idea of using that round mandrel and then turning it on inside and tapping it to get the oval shape back.
Mhm.
Love that. Love that tip. That is priceless.
Good, good, good. So you're doing the two wall method or the one wall? Are you making it all in one, or are you making it?
No, it's still the two different pieces.
Got it.
But I just can't get that one. It's insane. I can't even explain how insane it is. It has got to be, you know, and I don't want to push it because I'm afraid if I do, I'm going to chip it. You know, the stone if I force it. So I don't want to do that.
The bezel. It's just not big enough for the stone.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like one hair smaller.
Got it. And is it a big enough piece that you can fit it over a ring stretcher if you have one?
No, I don't have a ring stretcher. I wish I did.
Yeah, it's just super easy to go overboard. And if you're really just a pinch away, do you have good hand strength? Are you using the technique of the two?
Well, I don't
pliers?
have good hand strength because I've got two reconstructive hands that have been reconstructed. But I did get the new pliers that you used. You know, it has the one round side because I was trying to use the ring ones that had like the angled on the inside, you know, the regular, normal, old, you know, ones.
That's not going to size, that's going to bend. So the ones that have the curve on the inside are going to, if it's curving with the curve of your oval, it's going to just change the shape of it more than it's going to actually squeeze it. So if you really just need a hair, then you should be using a pair of round pliers, and it's going to make.
Well, I tried those too.
Yeah.
I tried those too. And it didn't get me where I needed to go. But I used those, I ordered those ones that you have, this like one half side is flat and the other half side is a round.
Okay, so half round. Yep. So these. Yep.
Yes, that's what I just ordered. It just came today. And nice. I still haven't gotten my little bezels, my little bezel things from Auto Fry.
Okay. So
I'm gonna call them tomorrow.
Here's a tip on this. If you are not good with hand strength, to get a really good squeeze, like you should be seeing marks when you do this. And if it's really still giving you trouble with these, use the rounds. I do that as my last resort because it makes marks on them and then you have to file them out. But it's the thing that'll get you there. And I'm going to show you the position I would use if I didn't have enough hand strength to really grip what I need to, which is harder on a heavy bezel. I would set myself up as if I were going to grip, and I would rest not against my block, but against like a solid, let's see if I can get something in view, something solid, like my bench edge. And I use the force, I just push forward into it to use that for the squeeze.
Okay, that's what I'll do then.
Yeah, be forewarned, if you have wussy cheapo pliers, that could break them because you're putting beyond the normal pressure on the joint. So
to tell you the truth, I can't even remember. I paid a lot of money for them, so they must be pretty good ones.
Good. Yeah, but that's a great, like, use other things to help make the fulcrum that you need for your pressure if your hands can't do it yourself. I just can't do that position very easily when I'm trying to also show you guys.
Thank you for showing me that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, but the videos are wonderful on YouTube. I must clap hands for that one for you.
Good. So the big difference for those videos is that obviously it's just me demoing here or showing my process as I learn about it. I give those kinds of videos, except even more detailed when I'm teaching one of my normal workshops. Just so you guys know, you get access for 60 days to the whole workshop recorded.
Oh, wow.
And that does a different rotation, different cycle than these do. That does I do some talking about the process. I do some demoing of the process. You go back to your bench and work on it. And then I'm there for you to ask questions. So you learn from the questions other people ask during that time. And then we show what we've done and where we've had problems and where we've had successes. And then we start it all over again in cycles. So yeah, I love being able to record it. This was one of the best things to come out of the pandemic for me. And I wasn't going to think of doing it until I met Francesca Watson, and she's like, no, this is how you make this happen. And she was right.
She's super.
So Barbara has said to us that bronze is more like silver because of the alloy. 10% tin, 90% copper, more malleable and doesn't work harden as quickly. Anneals something more like sterling silver. Ah, jeweler's bronze. Okay. It doesn't warp the way that brass does. How is it for, does it char? Does it get as much fire scale as brass does right away? Barbara?
It'll oxidize like brass or copper.
Okay. So it
but
doesn't get you the
any
true
amount of
benefit.
flux, or the fluxes you use will solve that problem.
Oh, got it. Okay. Are there special fluxes for bronzes?
No, what we use self-pickling flux, or
Okay.
but whatever flux you use, it worked just the way it would on silver.
Nice. That's Battens
I
is the
don't think
glowing
it
green
flakes,
one,
it
right?
flakes as much as copper would,
Mhm.
but probably a little bit more than silver would.
Okay, good to know. I haven't even gone shopping for sheet bronze. I literally have only seen it in casting form. Is it easily findable at most of the, Rios and other places?
I'm not sure. I mean, we use it frequently and commonly. And when Chris was teaching at the university, he used it instead of brass because it was more like sterling to work with. So if the students wanted to graduate to sterling, they had an easier they would have an easier transition, and it's a nicer color. The brass is kind of a greenish color, and the bronze is more of a goldish color. So it was nicer in that respect, and it was more similar to sterling in the way the students could work with it.
Beautiful.
So they would learn, and then they would decide to move on to sterling.
Nice.
I don't know that I would say that using it for a bezel would be the best thing, but I think using it as your base metal with a sterling bezel or a fine silver bezel would be more user-friendly than brass, because it doesn't have the problem that I described, that Chris, actually, this is all Chris's description. It doesn't have the alloy problem.
Yeah.
When you start using medium solder. And this is a situation where if you are doing soldering like this, you want to use hard solder instead of medium solder because of the alloy of the solder, not because of the temperature that you're heating it to.
So it's not bonding. It's what's the term?
It's doing the same thing. It's just doing it in a different way because of the alloy.
Gotcha. Cool. I may have to get
anyway, for whatever that's worth. And plus it's a much prettier color.
It really is. It really is. And there's some really wonderful patinas you can do, both natural and chemical to bronze.
Yeah.
I just don't.
You can enamel on it.
Yeah. Can you really? I did not know
that.
Well,
if the alloy for the bronze is less than 5%, 10% is a little high for enamel, but 5% is perfect for enamel.
Huh. Neat.
Less than 5%.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's some positive things to bronze versus brass. You may have to look a little harder for it.
I describe brass to my students as being bitchy. It behaves badly no matter what you do to it. And it sounds like bronze is gentler.
Bronze is the gentle person versus the bitchy person.
Yeah.
That is so good to know.
Yep.
I've been working with brass and it's just bitchy, like you say.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is that it warps all over the place.
It's
and
finicky.
Bronze won't warp so badly.
Yeah, brass is
finicky. You may have to search a little harder for bronze, but metalliferous or what's the other place? Now it's escaping me right now. What's
reactive metals?
No, reactive metals and McMaster Carr.
Oh wow, you can buy it from McMaster Carr.
Online metals.
It's going to be much cheaper from them probably.
Yeah.
Rio has it, and I just looked it up. It's called Red Brass, New Gold.
Yes, that was it.
Gold.
New Gold.
Yep. All those things are the same.
Yeah, I bought it as New Gold before many, many years ago.
Yeah.
When that first thing came out, I mean, I'm talking like probably 10 or 12, 15 years ago. New Gold was the big thing. It made its big splash debut.
Well, they just named it a different name. It's been there for a while, but
yeah,
it's the same thing, and that's good to know the different names for it.
So I was always taught that New Gold was brass. It's the bronze you're talking about?
85% copper and 15% zinc.
The brass bronze new gold thing, it depends on the alloy. And so what
Okay.
you're looking for is the new gold is not bronze, Chris says.
Okay,
Chris is
that's what I
standing
thought.
here
It's a
right here.
brass.
So
Yeah,
new gold has more zinc in it than bronze does.
okay. Good.
It's
Yeah,
better
I
than
was-
brass, but anyway,
There's yellow bronze and red bronze.
yeah. And what's the difference in that?
You want commercial red bronze.
So if you're looking at commercial bronze, it's commercial red bronze. And anyway, I'm sorry, Rachel. I don't
No.
mean to take over.
Oh, no, great aside for everybody. It makes me want to run out and get some sheet to play with.
Well, and especially if you're want to use something for a base metal and just the silver for the bezel,
Yeah,
it is more economical to
Nice.
start with.
very nice.
Anyway,
Okay, gang.
thank you for letting me interrupt.
No, please, that's the kind of interruption that this is designed for. Like, if you guys have good sources for things and good ideas and alternatives, my part of this process is working through John's stuff. That doesn't mean it's all that we have to talk about in the class or in the series. I should stop calling it a class, but so here's what we got on the results, gang. The top corner is a little bit knobby for me. I'm not entirely thrilled with how it came together, but it's also going to be below the line of the stone when I've got it set. And I am at the point where I'm not going to force my stone in. It needs a little reshaping. It's going to be okay with sizing, but it's still a little distorted from the shape. I will not want to try and force my stone into this at this point because it has the points. So there's a time at which you can't keep fitting and refitting without doing that drill in of the ball burr. So if you really, really have to see it in place to get your final shape and size, do your ball burr work now, right in each corner. And it's literally just at that point, taking it down into the lower wall and on both sides in this case, and then do any of your finishing of the shape of it. I'm probably going to have to go just a smidge down at each end because this doesn't have a terribly sharp drop off for the stone, and it has a fairly thick end to its the line that I'm blanking on right now. The point at which girdle. Thank you, man. Yeah, this has been a day. So yeah, it's got a really wide girdle at the ends, and so it's not going to rest as low as some marquee cuts that I have. You know, for example, I've got another one that I've been working up. If it's not stuck in there, it may already be stuck. I'm not going to pull that one out. But in any case, look at your stone. This is a thicker girdle than I would normally want on a stone. But it's going to be fairly sturdy when it's in there, is my guess. So, questions about the marquee? We're going to leave that one as that for now, and I'll do my usual sand and tighten up and clean up between sessions. All right.
So, I
Yep,
have
go
a
ahead.
question.
Yes, some
I
question.
know that this was like something that you said you were trying to figure out. So based on how in the past you probably would have done it,
Yep.
and then based on following the directions, did you get the same outcome?
I get the same outcome in that there is a thing to set a stone on. It's a good question. I want to do a few more using this method too before I decide whether I still prefer the two-parter, the method one. What I find is cleaner in this method is you get a sharper corner. So you absolutely get a much crisper corner than you do when you're trying to nest a marquee inside of a marquee. It's hard to get that steep point exactly fitted right, and it gets sloppy with, you know, solder points and so on. So I like that, and I like that it's closed and done. Like, it feels like time on soldering is faster. Time on sawing and prepping feels like it's longer. So it's sort of like weighs out in terms of time for me. What else do I like about it? I think my favorite thing about it is really that the entire bezel is one unit, unlike when you're making it as two and you can end up having gaps a little more easily and so on. So I might be convinced to go the two-part method this way, if I can get more comfortable with the wackiness of sawing across the angles, which is frankly the biggest pain of this whole, this setting.
Okay.
Did somebody else, and your mileage may vary. You may love one version over the other. This is just what my experience has been with these so far. Anybody else had a question? Just thought I heard.
Yeah. I looked through all my stones and I found no actual marquees, but extremely narrow ovals. And I looked at them and I thought, this would be difficult to take a bend. It's so tight. And I'm wondering, how much is the tip actually supported on the marquee? And could you do something similar, or would, I guess you'd end up with a hole, wouldn't you?
You'd have you'd have a gap at the end of your oval if you used a marquee setting for it. Have I been known to take small round bezels and turn them into marquees with my pliers? Yes, but the other way around, not really. Meaning if I buy manufactured step bezel settings, you can take a round and you can sort of, on a soft, small material, you can force a corner into it to turn it into a marquee, but I don't think I'd ever set an oval in a marquee. I think I would always try to custom shape it. If you want the effect of having a point on it, however, later in our book, we talk about place where he's sort of blending the techniques, where you can put a sort of a prong or a walled prong on the end of it. So you could build that corner out of silver and add it to the end as a decorative element. It's not necessarily there to hold the stone per se, or it could be. You can remember, step bezels can also be used as the base that you're using to support the stone, and then we build prongs or other components to hold them in place over it. So it's giving us a table on which it rests. Did that help at all?
Yes.
Okay. You have your ovals near you. Can you show them to us? I can't even see who's talking to me right now. Is that Toby?
Toby.
Let me pin you for a second, because I just want to see what you mean by a long oval.
I will pull one out of the box.
Okay.
The box just walked away from me.
Okay, while you look for that, anybody else have questions? Okay. We'll look at this stone and then we'll get on to the squares.
Let's. How am I supposed to?
There we go. Oh, okay. Yeah. So to me, that's just an elongated oval. And frankly,
Yeah.
is that one of the, is that a fossil? Is that down the center? Is that, or what's the streak down the center?
In my opinion, these were jewelers' fake stones that were made of glass, so it's like a tiger eye.
Got it. Okay. So to my mind, I would want to set something like that in a setting that emphasized the line rather than covering it. So I might build something that has side walls to it. I might build something that is a step bezel that then has prongs coming to either side, so that I've sort of got it held on either side of that line. Because I would, that's one of the coolest elements of that stone, but I would not honestly try to set it in a marquee setting. There are marquees out there to be had, I promise. Any other questions before we move on to, sorry, go ahead. Nope. Okay.
I have a question. I just kind of stopped because I knew you were going to be working on it.
Okay.
But I sort of did this one.
Hang on, who's talking?
Carmen.
Carmen, let me get you back on screen, Carmen. I don't know why my people who are talking aren't showing up to me. There we go. Spotlight. Okay, let's see what you got.
I did this one.
Nice.
And it's kind of like a step. I mean, it's got 2 walls.
Yeah, that's not even kind of like a step. That's a
I
step.
mean, and then, but I didn't do everything you did. So that's why I was like, you know?
Okay, you got an inner wall and an outer wall, right? And it's
Yes.
resting on the inner wall? Okay,
Yes.
so the only thing that you haven't done then, so I don't know whether you did it with method 1 or method 2 of John's or some amalgam of your own, is you may need to do some filing down at the front if you feel the stone is too high. It looks like it's in pretty good shape to me. And if it has a sharp enough point, you may want to use your ball burr to make that little pocket in the front so that it doesn't risk tripping the stone when you set it. That looks great.
All I did was solder it here. I mean, of course, I did the wall.
Yeah, so that's a teardrop. That's what we did last time.
Yeah.
Only a single solder in the point.
Mhm.
There we go. Yeah. Oh, and it's got a good front. It's not sloping down too much at the front. So I think you've got it in good shape.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever
Good.
works is the real answer. You know, no matter, I'm following John's because I'm trying to learn John's details. Whatever works for you is what works for you. So keep going.
Okay.
Nice job. All
Thank
right,
you.
let's see. Back to square. Where is it? Spotlight for everyone. There we go. All right, so I do not have any large square stones, not that are truly square. And my small square stones are kind of iffy and they're squaritude. Let me get the right bezel wall. Perhaps this. Where's my square wall? There we go, square wall. So again, this is trying a square with the 2-part wall. And on this one, we do want to really start with the getting a 45-degree angle on our first angle, because the way that we're building these kinds of bezels per John's directions is still going to be build one wall and build the other wall. So, but the difference is when we did the 2-part rectangle, the method 1, we were making things go beyond, right? Because we had or not beyond on both sides, beyond on one side, because we had the luxury of butting it up flat. But when we're doing the 2-part method, because we have that problem child inner wall, what he's having us do, and the picture for this one is on page, skipping back to the square. So on method 2 page, on page 67, he shows that he's doing 2 parts, but he's making the 45-degree angles filed in when it's done in method 2. Whereas in method 1, we were able to cut them past each other, build the 2 frames, nest them inside of each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So this takes more precision on the measurement, and you can't assume that your square is truly square. So keep that in mind as we work and as you work on your own. So I'm going to start by, oops, that's my smoky quartz. Oh no, I used my square for my smoky quartz and I used the wrong bezel wallet. This is going to be a taller bezel than I intended. Let's see, did I make any others? No, I think I'm set with what I've got. Okay, well, we're going to have a taller bezel or I'll file it down. Hands for that smoky quartz in its nice tall bezel. All right, so I think I'm going to actually do this lovely little tiny bitty citrine that I've got, because it's the closest to actually square that I have. And I'm going to start by putting a 45-degree angle on one end of my material. Get this set up in the vise. Any jewelers out there who've gone through the LASIX or something like it and still like their nearsighted vision for working at the bench? It's the reason I haven't gone and gotten it done.
I'm too scared.
Pardon?
I'm too scared.
Yeah, it's, I don't want to lose my near vision. Oop, that didn't work. Hold on a sec. There's my big file. There we go. Always use the biggest file you can. If that came out closer, if I'm wobbly again. Fairly healthy and mostly 45 degrees. Okay, so I've got my first wall side, and John recommends that we put a Sharpie mark as long as your stone isn't soluble, like an opal or something. So it's not, so you can wash it off with an alcohol ink as your starting corner, because as much as we'd like our squares to be perfectly square, they just aren't. And come to the fiddly bits, measuring our stone. .2, and remembering which angle, which side I'm starting on, that already has the angle cut. I'm going to mark the point I'm going to score and square it. Square. So I'm going just to the outside of my width of my mark, because I need to have room for the fold that we're going to be putting in. And this is where I always get stuck in, am I caught in the right size or under the size I need to be? Always easier to size up than down. That's the other advantage, by the way, of the two-parter. It's easier to size than this method too. So once again, we're doing from both sides. I have no material to grip on the other side. This way. And then I'm switching gears from the saw to use triangle file first. And I'll be finishing with the square. Going for that 2/3 so that I can get a nice crisp corner. 1/3 is going to, 3/4 to 2/3. 3/4 is going to get you a little bit more rounded than the 2/3. Checking from both sides. I also hope you guys are considering, as you work on these kinds of specific techniques, just how much they roll over into other aspects of your metalsmithing practice. So this cornering, when you do it in a large object, instead of being a bezel, it becomes a box corner, you know, or it becomes part of your clasp build at different scales. And a lot of the soldering techniques help improve the precision of your soldering. If you have real challenges with getting tiny amounts of solder or pick soldering, those are things that are really best practiced by making chains. And for if you want to get very, very detailed on your small scale soldering, you make a chain out of progressively smaller and smaller size links and smaller gauge. So you start from the middle with heavy gauges and work your way out. And as you work your way out, you get more and more precise. But those skills help with these tiny little things that we're doing on our soldering here. And when we get to prong setting, being able to pick solder is going to be quite useful.
Do you wear visors when you're soldering?
When I'm soldering, I wear goggles. I don't wear magnifiers, if that's what you mean.
Yes, magnifiers.
Yeah, I don't. So like my nearsighted vision, I have to take my glasses off to do everything at the bench because I'm so much better without them on nearsighted. But when I look up at the screen, I see blur.
Yeah, that's me too. I'm
Yeah.
nearsighted.
Okay, I'm once again bending my corner by putting the pliers to the side of the crease that I've made and folding upward. If it doesn't square up on that first shot, you're still okay. You can use your saw and touch up the cornering. But if you've got a good 2/3 of the way through, you're going to get fairly squared up. All right, and check it with my actual square, which I have to put my glasses back on to find. There we go. So I've got a little bit of curve in my wall. I want to straighten that out. Which I'm doing that squeezing technique for sizing. When you use flat pliers, it just straightens your walls. If I'm working on a flat walled bezel and it goes out of shape, I'll use the flat pliers from both directions. If I'm working on a curved bezel, I put the half round pliers on the inside of the curve and the flat on the outside of the curve, and you just gentle squeezes to straighten it back up. All right, looking pretty good. Now we see if I cut it too short. Where's my starting dot? Oh no, did I wipe my starting dot off? No, I didn't. There we go. Oh, it was disappearing on me. So this is another situation where you have to remember to account for the second wall. So I'm looking at it from the top, so I'm looking at it upright. If I had it down on upside down, I would make sure that both my stone and my bezel are upside down. So I've got a nice fit on the first wall. And now I need to measure for the second, but first I want to remark that dot so I don't lose it.
Rachel,
Can
while
you
you're
remind
doing
us
that,
the gauge of your metal?
Sorry, that was two questions at once. Somebody go.
The
Something
gauge
about-
of your metal for the strip?
On this project, I'm doing 22 gauge outer and 24 gauge inner. 24 gauge is the lowest you want to go for the inside, and I've been using it across the board on all of the steps. The 22, it depends on the stone. On the smaller stones, I've been going thinner. On some of the ones that like that last that teardrop that I did, or the pear shape, I went to an 18 gauge. Somebody else
Rachel,
has a question?
will you draw again or tell me again where, so you made your file cut where did you put your pliers to do that bend? In the middle of that saw cut, to the
Nope.
right of that?
To one side, let me see if I can draw a visualization of what it would be if it were flat. Reason the green pen sticks more than the rest of them. Okay. So if I have created this, so it would be the other way. So this is my crease, right? That I've built. I'm putting my upright pliers, my parallel jaw pliers, right here.
Got it. Thank you. Wow. Yeah.
It's really, really wacky. But so the pliers are here and here, straight along just the outside edge. Because what's happening, if you think about it, is we're closing a book. We're folding it in on itself. So we want this to have the most flexibility it can to crease up against the side of the plier. Okay, is that all the questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so where was I? I was putting my dot in the corner again and making sure that I have the right line up. Looking pretty good. So what I'm checking for that I think won't even show, even if I bring it over to the detail camera, is I'm checking to make sure that the point at the corner of my stone is running. So remember on this first wall, I already filed that angle in. And then we've just built this one that we're cornering, right? And so what I'm checking when I set my stone on the lower wall is that the point of the stone is headed straight out that edge. I don't want it over, I don't want it under. I want it to be right across the line that I'm going. And then we're going to do this.
Is that where your dot is on your stone?
Yeah, my dot, this is where I started my project, and this is the file that I did to cut an angle, a 45-degree angle in it. And so I'm making sure that when I'm looking at that dotted corner resting on its inner wall, because we always want to make sure it's on the wall that it's going to be stabilized on, then it is lined up exactly with the 45-degree angle of the stone. Now, that's the point, and that's, in this case, it's a fairly simple facet on this stone. It doesn't have any corner faceting. Don't let the corner facets fool you when you get a fancier cut of a stone than what I have. Just make sure that your point is following the 45-degree line. Because if it's not, then we're not sized right. And so the other corner would be following this 45-degree line, which we've closed. So in this case, it's sitting right in the corner. Okay, so I'm going to go over and solder this spot so that we have a nice stable square. And then I'll come back and measure and size the second edge of the wall. And I'm only using these because it wants to tip over on me. Oops, except I'm not following my own rule, which is I want to solder from the back side, from the bottom side rather than the top, because it's got heavier gauge metal there. A little bit of heavy solder. It's not the most stable soldering position I've used here, but Get it. Give it a moment.
So are you using hard solder?
Absolutely, yeah. John uses hard solder all the way through, which drives me insane when he's doing lots and lots of fiddly things. But that leaves easy solder for attaching it to a project, he says. I personally, he's thinking of the person who's got to repair his work in another 50 years. So if it's all hard solder on the object, it's going to not come apart when you're doing a repair, like replacing, taking the setting off to do a polish or prong replace or something like that. I personally use hard and then medium and then easy as needed, but I try to do as much of it as possible with the hard, and I try to never use easy if I can help it. So yeah, self-pickling flux works better on brass, bronze, or copper than a paste flux. Okay. So, and you said, Barbara, the battens, we're going back to the bronze topic on our chat. The battens, is that the bright green stuff? The glowy green? The self-pickling, I think, is the, are you on mute? Well, if Barbara hears it, she can post to it, but yeah, just investigate a little bit as you work on other metals. Okay, so I'm going to check my square because just the act of heating it may have distorted it some. So check my square, stayed pretty solid.
Switch cameras.
Oh, thank you. Thought I'd hit that button. So I'm just checking the square. Still looking pretty good. And now I'm going to measure my second wall, because as nice as it would be to assume that they're all the same, they aren't going to be. Side. Somebody's hammering. If you can just mute, that would be great.
Yeah, I never know whether to put the tips on the stone or move it back up into the.
Yeah, if
lines.
anybody has more training than I on that topic, please pipe up. Yeah, I so what I've been reading on it is that you use the tip and then also recheck halfway up. You don't use where it's gone open like that. And you take the average of them to get a good measurement, but that seems a little ridiculous. The whole point is to get accuracy. I think the real truth is, as long as you're consistent about what you're using, you're measuring the same way. If you use the inside, use the inside, and if you don't, but I don't know. I would love a class on how to better use my measuring tools in the metal arts, because I'm clearly not using them to the best possible. Okay, in this case, I've made my mark, but I'm going to give myself a little room for my angle filing. Square. Oh, I've got a tiny little lump of solder on the back from what I just did. It's getting in my way. Changing the stones from yellow to blue. Start in the corner. trim this with the shears and then file. You could hand cut this absolutely. Using the shears does that distortion. So we have to flatten it back out. It's kind of a pain. And one of the bummers is that with this tiny thing, I'm not gonna be able to get it into my angle. My miter jig to get this angle. So I have to kind of hand eyeball it, and I want to square it up. And then I'm going to get pliers out to hold it. Sometimes you can put them in a ring clamp or something. It depends on what you got for grip. I'm going to just hold it in my pliers at that approximately 45 degrees. I'm sure there are better ways to hold this kind of thing. If anybody has ideas that you use when you're working on tiny cuts and filings, please pipe up. I would love to hear more.
So are you going to do the 2-part and solder 2 parts together? You're not going to do one long strip?
Right, yeah, so what he
Okay.
shows in the squares is doing it as two-parters. When he gets to the marquee, we're doing it all in one strip.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion John mostly does the method 1 or just avoids stones with corners for all I know.
Okay.
I don't know. It feels like there's something that we don't have in writing. Oh, I'm way off on my measurement on that one. Yikes. Bear with me. A lot more filing to do.
Yeah, I've been having the same problems of trying to hold small things.
Yeah, and as I age, I'm getting worse and worse at it. Much more clumsy. Dropping things all over the place.
I mean, there's that ring holder, but even that, it comes out of that.
Yeah, and with the bend in it, it's hard to get the angle that I need.
Right.
They have grippier pliers though. Let's try this. Sorry for the fingers on the chalkboard, gang. Not at all even. So right now I'm just trying to take some material off and then I'll re-angle it because I made it a little too long. Left myself too much room for that angle. Looks like by the time I put the angle in, we'll be in better shape. Okay, because I've been bullying it, I need to square it back up a little bit. Take a smidge more off on the right path. So again, what I'm watching for when I'm checking this is that that angle is lining up with the angle I've got that I'm filing. Okay, good shape. So we've got one piece that we're doing, that we're setting aside, and now we're going to do the same thing for the other side. Just going to straighten out and file one of those edges, squared up. I can use my handy dandy piece.
I would think that would be difficult because like you said, not everything is square, but then you're working with something that is square.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of why we make, you know, we don't bulk manufacture our findings for certain types of stones. You know, you can buy a pre-made square bezel, but if your stone isn't exactly the right dimensions, you either spend a lot of time modifying it or it's not going to stay very well. And we get pretty boring variety when we do that. You know, you can't do extra detailing on them as much. So it's really your choice is modify existing or make your own. And that's why John wrote the book. So
Yeah, I love this book. I have marks all over it.
uh-huh.
Stickers, marks,
Yep.
notes.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of pretty much every book that has been published under Bryn Morgan Press. They're just incredibly beautifully laid out and they chose great subject matter. One of my other favorites is the Betty Helen Longy and Cynthia Ide book on forming. If you don't have that one, it's almost as like a coffee table book. It's so good that when I brought it home for the first time, I got it right. I think it came out right before the holidays, so I bought it for myself as a read while I'm traveling kind of thing. And my mathematician, computer scientist father, and my professor mother, who focuses on adult ed kind of, teaching teachers to be better teachers kind of thing. And my theater stage manager sister all were captivated by it as much as I was, because the photography in it is so beautiful, and the shapes that all of the forming and forging work gets you are so amazing. I think it's
Rachel?
Yep.
May I interject here that
Sure.
something that I learned from Charity Hall
Sure.
was when you're filing that flat, you want to file into that tooth. So turn it around and file towards that little tooth nope, turn it again.
This
No,
way?
turn it again. Nope. Yep, there you go.
So what's the tooth into? Oh, this little tooth.
Yeah,
Because then you're supporting it against the wall.
right.
That makes a whole lot of sense. What a nice little tidbit. Thank you. Can you all tell what she's talking about? There's the little snag, the little notch that comes down. So it acts as a supporting wall for the pressure that I'm putting on, keeping it moving less. Love it.
And supposedly that's supposed to be true.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
So what was the book again that you recommended?
It's creative forming. Does anyone know the title off the top of their head? I don't have it within hand's reach. Betty Helen Longy and Cynthia Ide from the Bryn Morgan Press collection. Creative forming, it's something.
Isn't it called fold forming?
No, not the Charles Luton Brain book.
Okay.
It's for sinusoidal shapes and things like that.
I know, I'd have to get up and go get it too.
You can Google it and paste a name in there. That'd be great.
Creative forming.
Creative metal forming.
Creative metal forming, beautiful. Yes. It's just, you just sit and drool over every image in it, and then certainly you think you're going to go through every exercise in the book. Whether you actually do or not is a different ballgame. Okay.
I love books. I just
Yeah, me
love
too.
books. I could never have enough of them.
I am with you. I come from my mom's original career was in library science, so I came from a rather large book collecting family. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm checking that when I start putting in that newest 45-degree angle, that I've still got a clean fit. So we can see that fits nicely with my stone in place. And it's going to be quite crisp if I can get that corner soldered in. So I need to measure this third side. This is the part, like holding the tiny little stones, and what does me in. Okay, and from my nicely squared off, squaring up my line. Back to our sawing and cornering. How are we doing for time? 6:30, good. Score it, forgot to score it. Even that tiny little bit of a score from a sharp object gives you something that's a tooth for it to grab when you're doing the sawing. Arg. Sawing the little bits, that's the tough one.
You need the butter or a candle?
I need what?
The butter lube or a candle?
Oh, I use Burn Life or I use a beeswax candle. The problem is what I was grumbling about was when you need to switch to the flip side and there's only a little bit here, there's not really anything to grip while you're sawing. So that was what I was grumbling about was fiddly bits of how do I hold it.
Yeah, it looked like you were having a hard time there.
It's just awkward and trying to be conscious of like I do all kinds of weird poses when I'm not trying to keep on camera for you guys. That's why I end up filing in midair. Try to be consistent on your corners with whatever you did on that first corner, because we know that the ones that we're doing that we're going to solder together are going to be sharp corners. So we want this one to reflect that in that going 2/3 of the way through to get a really crisp corner. Obviously, you can do a little bit of touch up with filing afterwards, but let's say we wanted our outer wall to be patterned. We wouldn't have that luxury of taking away material. I feel like I'm far enough down on this side. All right, we are going to once again use our now misplaced, oh, they're right in front of me, parallel draw pliers. And again, here, let me actually draw a Sharpie line down the channel, because then you can see what I was doing with that sideways.
Great idea.
Let's see, blue might show up. So there's my my seam, or my valley that I've created, and I'm going literally just to the side of it. So that's showing. So I want to be parallel to the upper edge of the valley I've created, and that gives me the spot to close into.
Perfect.
Now, the heavier gauge you work with on these corners, the harder it's going to be to get a nice crisp corner. Like I'm liking what I've got at the top, but I realize I didn't go deep enough on the lower half. I can do a little quick touch up with the saw and do a tiny amount of correcting of it. It's going to always be crisper and better if I can do the first pass. But what I'm doing now is trying to saw more towards the bottom than I do towards the top to just clean up that one. It's just sort of dropping everything. It's just sort of rounding a little bit more at this end than it is. See how crisp that is? Nice and clean. But this end is a little lumpy, so I'm trying to clean that up. Okay, I'm checking my square. Too far. Okay, I'm hopping back over to solder the corner. Upside down. So I'm putting my heat on the heavier gauge. Except I forgot to cut more hard solder. Solder slot. Just checking the top to make sure that it actually got flowed all the way down to that point. This one actually looks pretty good. I don't need to touch it up. Okay. Final cut if we can. Back to the bench. Okay, so because I've been heating it, it could have warped, so I'm going to check my square again. It's a little bit wobbly. And at this point, I can actually also check and see how we're doing as a set. It's not going to be perfect yet because that corner is going to be in the way on the far side. So it's going to be a little bit off on this corner. I can start to see, whoop, fall through. It's too big. Yeah, it's too big for me to fall through. So the only thing I can do at this point is check my opposite corner, make sure I've got the right one. So that goes there. This one goes here. Okay, I'm looking fairly good on size. So now I'm heading back to home plate and measuring my fourth wall. Leaving myself enough room to get my angle file. Still squaring up, but once again, I have a little solder blob in my way to get a good square. Actually try sawing this one and see if it's noticeably easier to clean up. Because I'm always lazy with those damn shears and it's not the wisest way to go. Squaring up. For sizing. Again, gave myself a little more than I wanted to. Grippy pliers. So one of the nice things about holding this with the pliers this way is that I can create my 45-degree angle pretty readily just by the angle at which I hold the pliers. And so then I'm filing flat across when I've got it in an angle. Was there a question that I interrupted someone starting to ask?
Well, that was exactly what I was going to ask, is how you're getting that 45, and you did that great.
I'm psychic, apparently. Magic, that's how I'm getting the 45. And I mean, again, there are certainly other ways out there to do this. I'm working with the tools I've got, and I may not be using them optimally, but I grew up eyeballing a lot of my work. Looking for sizing. Okay, we're still a little bit long. I'm going to take more off of this and re-angle it.
So are you creating a flat and then going back and angling
Yeah,
it again?
because
Okay.
I'm a hair's breadth away from that hitting the corner that I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to flatten it down and then re-45 it to give myself that slight hint of different length than I need. For size now. Still want a smidge more off of that. I think it's all going to come off at the 45-degree angle. Okay. Let's see what happens when you put them together. Okay, what I'm seeing is that I'm still a little bit loose. I'm still a little bit bigger than I want to be, which is good in the context of I can still take material away before I solder this, but not so good in that I don't want to solder it yet.
That's gonna look fabulous.
I hope so. I really love square stones. I just don't love making bezels for square stones.
Mhm.
A little bit more off of each side on this one, I think.
What do you think you'll convert it into? A pendant?
So right now, because I'm doing this project, I'm literally just making that board that I keep pulling out with samples.
Okay.
When I'm done with the Cogswell projects, I'll probably be turning some of them into samples for my Bezels Less Ordinary class, which is modifying those kinds of, in particular, step bezels, but also other things.
Great.
But yeah, for me, it's like, you know, the way kids used to do samplers when they were learning how to sew. This is my sampler builder. I may be tempted by some of them to take them out for future projects, but none of the stones that I've been working with are ones that I've designated for an existing design. The other thing I forgot to check was whether I had distorted my square. That may be part of why it's loose. Yeah, it's a little wobbly, so let me straighten it out. Let's see where that lands us. Now, I'm getting down to the, it needs tiny, tiny amounts of adjustment step, which makes this a little more challenging. And because it's, I mean, a little itty bitty bit can make a difference. So what I'm finding is I can almost get it to sit in its position, which means it's just tiny, tiny. Yeah, see there, it'll even sit adequately. I'm just seeing a little bit of gap between the stone and the wall that tells me I want to take down like a hair more material off of my my second piece. And a hair can make a huge difference to how it fits. Remember also that err on the side of making it too small than too big, because too big means you cut it apart. Although John has a nice little passage in the book, I'll look up in a second where it is, about if you get one of these ever so slightly too big, what he recommends is you go back to the same corners that you soldered and you just saw through it, and the amount of saw through that you do takes away the material you need taken away. So you saw through it, resolder it, and you're boom, you're done if it's just a tiny amount too big.
And then when you solder, it has to be like so flat and so even.
Which is why we're doing these 45s. So I don't know if it can show there, but we're doing pretty well on the 45s.
Okay.
I've got a little bit at the top on one side. Oh no, it's not the top that's catching. One side has a little bit of a curve. So I got to take a little smidge off of that. That's just pushing out one side further than the other. Do a sharper 45, cleaner 45. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Let's see where I started. So, still a little big. Yep, still a little big. More to take away. There are fiddly bits in every setting. It's just a matter of which stage the fiddly bits come in. Fiddly bits on our next project are on the intricate measuring of the flat component. Fiddly bits on the one part on method 1 is getting that inner ring set inside of the outer ring. Rotate, it's the wrong one. All right, I'm much happier with that. All right, onward to setting it up for soldering. And here we need to make sure that we aren't skewing the angles. We need to have them be square on or flush on to each other. And that is where having those T-pins may help again, because you can sort of encourage it to stand in one place. And what I'm going to focus on is just making sure that one side is really well connected first. Oh, not moving out of position. And then I'll touch up my fit and do the other side. So unless you've got a super flat soldering surface, this is going to want to move around on you from different levels of the material it's sitting on. That. I don't bump it out of the way. solidly halfway down, not further. A little more material in there.
I think we're all holding our breath.
Yeah, you and me both. Okay, so I got one side soldered. I'm gonna pause, get my T-pins out of the way so that they're not stealing my heat. And then I'm going to I'm going to quench it and work on making sure that I'm nice and snug for the second side, which may take a little bit of finagling with pliers. Grab my flat pliers. I'm just going to encourage it to be a little more square on this other side. It's a little off of square. Sometimes that's about squeezing it closed. In this case, it's off a little bit inside as well. So I'm going to hop back over and give it a tap with a mallet just to straighten out, because my inside wall is what's giving it away.
Can you show that, Rachel?
Yep.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
That. And so I'm just going to try to straighten out. One lip is up a little higher than the other. What's giving it away is that the inner wall is not flush. So I need to tuck it back down. It's convincing it that it wants to go. This is as good as I'm getting on this one. It's a little closer. I may have to do a little work with a graver to take the notch of material that's higher in one corner down once I'm done soldering. We're still working with hard solder here as much as we can. And remember that in this second seam, your big challenge is to not open up the seam on the other side. That can happen quite easily. So I'm concentrating more of my heat on the outer line and on the inside line from in front. That flow. Oh, see if I got it all the way across. Smidge of touch up on that one. Just my smidge. Making sure it flows all the way top to toe. And boom, wow, that got a little hotter than I wanted it to. Give it a moment to cool before I quench. But we have a roughly square shaped square, which is okay because our stone is only roughly square shaped. I'm going to toss that in the pickle and take any questions. Anyone?
Yeah, you said that you were going to take that blob off with a graver.
So
Was
it's
that-
not a, yeah, not a blob. It's just too small for you guys to see on screen. Let me show you what's happening.
Is that on the inside or is that
Yes.
on the out?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the
Okay.
inside. So, you know, early in the process of method 2, John talks about how critical it is that you have a nice, even, you know, properly sized wall, both inner and outer. And what I got was there was a place where I had obviously not kept as smooth a line as I thought when I was cutting. So inside, in one corner,
Change your
is-
camera.
oops, thank you. Inside on my second wall, it comes to here, and then right over here, it comes up a little higher. So I need to take this line down with a graver. Right?
Okay,
Instead of
got it. Yeah.
meeting nicely, I've got about, you know, a millimeter or less of excess, which means I did not get an evenly sized stretch. Probably means that I picked from the junk end of my piece of metal that I did because I was focused on, yeah, in fact, I can tell I did because I had intended to start with the end that I'd marked because it had cleaner lines. So I probably had a place where I didn't get a clean, even fit. Shows how critical it is to make sure that your two strips are well squared up, well flushed on the piece. And so I'm going to have to do it in After Effects. I'm going to have to take that extra metal out and get it so that it's going to sit level. Otherwise my stone's always going to tilt in that corner. Oops,
Nice job, Rachel.
So that's a square. Any other questions? Okay, anybody want to, let me first go through what we're going to cover on the next session. And show you, I'll give you a teaser on that. Because I want you to start looking at this page in the book very, very hard. Because it's got a subtlety in the picture again that does not give away. Let me see what page is it. It does not give away the details until you really look at the picture. On page 71, he goes through the 6 steps of marking off the emerald cut on a strip. Item number 3 is the one I want you to mark the heck out of, because this was my 5th reading of the book before I realized what he was actually showing us there. Represents taking your A, B, and C measurements, not from the stone, but from the stone with your bezel wall pushed up against it and the marks extended from the angles that they go at. What does that mean? Let me show you. So I've tried to draw this. I'm going to bring this over to the skinny camera and see if I can show, the good camera, and see if I can show you up close. So I've tried to draw a sort of more detailed, there we go. No, too far. Okay, so ignore this one over here. We're looking at this one. Here's my drawing of the outline of my stone. Here. It is important that you draw into scale the first layer of the facet that has these angle cuts in the corners. Okay, because those angles matter when you're sizing things up. And then the A, B, and C that he's referring to is after you've extended a drawing line from those angles across the thickness of the material we're using. If you think about it, it makes sense. We need to have a wide enough piece inclusive of the material for the wall of the stone. So yes, you could take this measurement and add the thickness of your stone to it, but this way what you're getting is the exact spot that we need to cut the saw blade angle on. So what I'm showing here is the gray with the dashed line is our bezel wall thickness, right? That's we literally made our method 2 wall. And this stone is resting on it, so it's actually a little bit underneath the black line of the stone. But what we've done is we've drawn across the sizing, and it's the outside diameter. So there's a tiny difference here, but that tiny difference is what makes up why we often get these too short when we're just measuring based off of the stone. So it's that out to the outside angle. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Anybody still need clarity on that one? Okay. So yep, you still want more?
Okay. We're measuring, okay, I get the whole thing of the measurement, but then on the corner, how you're being specific, you're measuring it bigger on the outside is what you're saying?
So we are measuring it bigger than the edge of the stone. What I'm trying to point out is John's drawing expresses the A, B, and C, but doesn't point out that your A, B, and C is not the edge of the stone, but the edge of the stone when the angle is extended out. So he's measuring his A, B, and C marks there don't say in any of his notes that what he's actually saying is measure the outer edge when the wall is bumped up against the stone, not take the dimension of the stone. Okay, so this one's a little tricky, and part of the challenge of it and why I like his concept of working from the wall instead of from the stone. Like, yeah, sure, we can take the measurement of the stone and we can add the material thickness to it and get our measurements for each of them. But he's also making us very aware of the angle we're aiming for in looking at this. And my big problem with emerald stones with this kind of setting is I'm invariably undersized on my corner angles. So when I realized that it was just that there's not a whole lot of explicit detail about it in his drawing, that makes the difference. So when you're looking at get your biggest possible cleanest cut emerald stone, because this is a pain in the butt if your sides are not really fairly equal, fairly even, you know, your corners are the same size, your short sides are the same size, your long sides. Or you can do a square, you know, it can be your B and A sides can be the same size. It's what we care about for this one is the corners. But if it's about how wide that facet is that impacts your overall visual layout of the design. So look at your stone, pick up the biggest one you can find because it's a lot easier to see this when you're working big, and very, very carefully measure and trace it out and get your angles in there, including that facet angle. That's the important part. And we are going to be cutting those with the saw blade only. We're not going to be doing the triangle files and so on because they're too shallow of an angle. We want to do really nuanced cuts and work our way around it. So this is different than our other stones in that we're going to lay out the whole strip's measurement. So it's do or die. We got to get all the measurements right. And then we start folding it and soldering it, folding it and soldering it, folding it and soldering it until it comes around the bend and goes back. Questions? I'm probably going to spend 2 or 3 hours measuring the stones that I'm doing before I even come in front of you guys. So I'm going to pre-prep my stones for all this because I want to measure 75 times and cut once. So that's what we're headed for as our next and last of the step bezel shapes. And then we start working on variants of the bezels, like I have a rough rock formation, a crystal formation. So we're doing irregular bezels, and we will do one mixed prong step bezel. I may nominate one of the marquees that I've done or something and use that. to set. Oh, I'm talking at you as if I'm looking at your face. You're looking at my face. So that's next setting, but I won't be at all surprised if the emerald setting takes all of next session. I wouldn't be surprised if I feel I need to do a second time the session after that because it's that rough. And then we're going to start working through the funky bezels in the sessions after that. So we will be doing some, well, some of them aren't funky. Some of them are just tube setting. So we'll be working off of heavy wall tubing, probably by the beginning of April. And we'll be doing both the version that is a seamless heavy wall and then making our own by nesting, which you guys have already successfully done in the form of making your own rounds, but we're going to do it from tubing. So for that one, I'll be using square tubing as a challenge to myself. So nested squares, but you can do it with nested round. And we'll do a double setting with bullet. I'm going to put a pair of them. And that's actually stepping back to the bezel we did the round one of with the square wire as its interior wall. We're just using a square wire in the middle of a double bezel. So that's where we're headed. And then we get to do some stone setting and move into chapter 4 after that. Prong setting. Any questions about upcoming?
So
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
you said tube setting, so that would be continuing on with what page? Because there's a
Tube
lot
setting.
of different.
So tube setting he barely touches on in on page 76.
Okay.
We'll do one of the prong modified settings that you see up top on that page before we do the tube setting.
Okay.
So and tube setting is probably going to be like boom, boom, boom. We'll do the tube setting, the round seamless setting, which is really drilling into a piece of tubing. And then we'll do the nested in the square, which is a little fancier. And then we'll do the double bezel, probably all on the same day, because those are all quick and dirty, relatively speaking.
We'll see.
Yeah. We'll see.
Rachel, you did say we were going to do some bullet and some tongue settings, right?
Is that in this? So bullet, I'm using bullets when I'm doing the double bezel for sure. Oh, right. And then I forgot. So it's a little bit more before we get to the end of chapter 3. We're going to do a tongue setting, and we're going to do what he calls a cup bezel, which confuses the heck out of me because cup bezels to me are just the ones that you get pre-manufactured flat backed. But where he's doing the tall bullet and tall tongue in a domed. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. I've never done that setting before.
Oh, they're kind of cool. They're kind of cool.
Yeah. And we also have, and the last one in that, well, there's 2 variations. There's a conical in that series as well. And then one of my absolute favorites that I wish I thought to do more is reverse setting. He doesn't go terribly deeply into it. He's using he's using a bullet in his example there, but I love reverse setting faceted stones. There's just some really cool effects that you can get about dimensionality in your work. So we'll talk about that. So I guess we have a few more sessions. Oh goodness, this chapter just never ends. Then there's
I know, that's why I said,
right.
okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was thinking some of these were in the next chapter. And then we got the actual teardrop or briolets, which is another one that I haven't done that I'm looking forward to. And there's 2 versions of that, one where it's set with cutting into the stone and one where it's set with building a frame to grip it. So yes.
Yeah, I did. I cut some acorns for Julia Woodman, gosh, many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. I cut some acorns for her.
Nice.
And I had to put like a little ridge, like a little groove at the top of it. So when she sat down for the workshop that she taught, when she sat that down onto it, it would just slide over top of it and attach.
Yeah. Were you using a grinding stone of some kind, or were you using like a cutoff
machine? Gabbing machine.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, nice. I actually started off, when I started off silversmithing, I wanted big big stones. Okay.
Yeah.
Couldn't get any way back then.
So you
So
had to make
I
it.
took a lapidary class at a local gym club, and I ended up doing lapidary in addition to silversmithing. Well, then everybody wanted my stones when I would come to class. So that just kind of erupted.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay,
that was-
anybody have show and tell for the last couple moments? Anything you want to show that you've been working on? Or any sticking points?
I have a question about a stone.
Sure. Let's spotlight you just a sec.
I got this stone from a friend.
Are you showing for other people? 'Cause
And I
can't-
didn't
hang
know
on a
what
sec.
it is.
Oh, there we go. Oh my goodness.
It's big. I got it from a friend and I don't know what it is.
I don't know that I can see it clearly enough. It looks like a blurry moon rock to me with bubble gum on it. Can you pull it back from your camera a little bit?
Yeah, pretty hard to identify a rock like that.
And you put water on it. If you can put water on it,
Yeah,
we can see the color.
Okay.
that's a good idea.
Oops, except now you've frozen, I think.
Uh-huh.
Is she frozen for everybody or just
Okay.
me? Oh, there we go. Carmen, you may be freezing on us. We're getting that your network is low. While she's doing that and hopefully getting back in better connection, anybody else have anything they want to show? Oh, there we go. You back?
It's wet now.
Yeah, camera quality is not quite there for us to see a lot. Is anybody recognizing it? Maybe get a photograph. Oh, it's got cool crystal formation in it though.
Yeah.
Do you have a local lapidary club you can bring it to?
I don't know.
They might be able to check it out for you and maybe even cut some stuff for you.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering because I thought it
Yeah,
was
go
kinda
on
cool.
YouTube, not YouTube, Facebook, and ask some of the lapidary clubs on there. Once you get a real good, clear picture and make sure it's wet where they can see it.
Okay.
And then maybe they can give you what the name of it is.
Nice.
Cool.
All right. Anybody else have show and tell?
All right.
All right. Well, happy bezel making.
I posted my stuff already.
I love it. I've been seeing it. I'm excited to see
Oh.
people post things.
Thank you.
It's looking good.
Yeah, I get excited. I did.
Well,
I
you
don't
should.
know how I finished it, but I finished it.
Nice. Nice. All right, gang, have a good evening and I'll see you again in 2 weeks for dun 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 emerald cut.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
we're real eager.
We're really rooting for that.
All right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, bye.
Thank you so much.